Hi everybody, it's Mr. Poller. In this video I'll be discussing the scientific method, which is a process used by scientists to answer questions. I'll also be discussing a sample experiment that my students perform to learn more about the scientific process. The learning targets covered by this video include that students should be able to apply the scientific method to solve problems and to evaluate the design of an experiment, to explain why scientists and society use the scientific method, to identify and explain the parts of a scientific experiment, to explain the need for controls in an experiment, finally, to differentiate between qualitative and quantitative data. A good experiment starts by doing research to find out background information about a topic. And these types of observations, this kind of information that we gather, will allow us to identify a quality question. So the things that I looked at included what type of survival time do people have if they fall into cold water? Also, I looked at what type of depth of ice do we need in order to be safe, whether that's walking on the ice, uh, driving a snowmobile or a car or a truck onto the ice. And finally, in my background research, I discovered this interesting piece of information that snowmobile and ATV accidents accounted for 50% of ice-related fatalities in Minnesota between the years 2009 and 2014. And this led me to develop my research question. So the question was, what if you did fall into the ice? What if you were in cold water and you weren't able to get out on your own? Now, hopefully help is coming for you, but the research question is this. What is our best survival strategy to preserve body heat if we fall through the ice and can't get out so that we can hang on long enough so that hopefully help can arrive to get us out of the water? I came up with two possible survival strategies. One was to ball up and conserve body heat to try to stay warm for as long as possible. The other survival strategy that I came up with was to move around, because when our bodies are moving around, we're generating body heat. The next part of our process is to make a hypothesis. Now, what is a hypothesis? It is a testable explanation for a situation or an answer to our question. And I always encourage my students to use wording if, then, because. So I'll give you a sample hypothesis for our survival strategy experiment. Here it is. If you move around in cold water, then you will stay warmer because active muscles generate heat because of friction. Our next step is to actually perform a scientific experiment. Now, our experiment is going to run something like this. We're going to hold a thermometer in our hand, tightly in a fist, so that we can measure the normal temperature of our body. We don't want to submerge our entire body in the water because that wouldn't be a safe experiment, but we can submerge our hand in the water using our hand as a model for the entire body. So again, we're measuring the temperature of our hand by putting our hand around the thermometer, making a fist around it, and waiting for the level of the mercury or the fluid on the inside of the thermometer to stop moving so it stabilizes. So we read our starting hand temperature. Then, right here, we're going to submerge our hand in cold water, and we're going to leave it there for 45 seconds. Once we've finished timing 45 seconds, we'll immediately remove our hand from the cold water and once again grip the thermometer. We're going to watch the liquid level in the thermometer drop until it reaches a stable level, and that is our final or ending hand temperature. By knowing the temperature that our hand started at and the temperature that our hand ended at, we're going to be able to calculate the change in temperature of our hand or how much heat energy our hand lost because of being in the ice water. Now we want to talk a little bit about experimental design. So we're going to have two different trials that we do in our experiment. One trial is for the control group, the other trial is for the experimental group. These are basically our two different survival strategies. The control group is used for comparison purposes, so this typically is when we don't have any treatment. So for our control group, that'll be when we hold our hand underwater, just making a fist. This is going to simulate balling up and not moving in the ice water. The experimental group is going to simulate The other survival strategy, which is moving around to to generate body heat. So here we're going to move our hand around while it's submerged in the water. So these are our two different trials. Again, in one trial, we have our hand submerged, closing it up in a fist, not moving it. In the other trial, we're going to have our hand under the water and we're going to be moving it around to try to generate body heat. Continuing our look at experimental design, we want to talk about variables. There's two main variables that we want to talk about: the independent variable, also called the manipulated variable, and the dependent variable, which is also called the responding variable. The independent variable is what we control as experimenters. So we set this up, it's changed by the scientist. We believe it is going to affect the outcome of the experiment. In our hypothermia experiment, this is what are we doing with our hand when it's submerged under the water. The dependent variable, also called the responding variable, is what we are measuring at the end of our experiment to see if there's a difference between the two survival strategies. In the hypothermia experiment, the dependent variable is how much the hand temperature changes. Finally, I should mention constants. These are things that are going to stay the same throughout the experiment. In other words, these are things that are going to be the same in all of the trials that we perform. So we're going to submerge our hand always for 45 seconds under the ice water. We always want to have a 50-50 mix of ice and water in the bucket. So everything that's going to be the same in all the trials, these are the constants of our experiment. As we perform our experiment, we're going to be collecting a lot of data. The two different types of data are quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative data is numerical, so these are coming from measurements. So some examples of quantitative data in our hypothermia lab will include the starting hand temperature, the ending hand temperature. We'll also be calculating the change in temperature of our hand, which is called the delta T, or the change in temperature. Qualitative observations are also really important in determining is there a difference in our survival strategies. Qualitative observations are descriptive. They do not include numbers, so they're not measurements. Examples of qualitative data might be things like, what is the color of the hand before it's submerged in the ice water? What is the color of the hand after it comes out of the ice water after being submerged for 45 seconds? What does the hand feel like? This is another thing that we can give a good description of what my hand felt like while it was submerged and immediately after I bring it out of the ice water. Once we've collected data, we need to analyze that data to try to see what it tells us about our hypothesis. Is our hypothesis supported, or is it one that we're going to reject? We want to look for patterns, in other words, in the numbers that we've collected and the qualitative observations that we've made during the experiment. As we think about analyzing quantitative data, we want to create a graph and we want to perform statistical analysis. So I've cut off the bottom portion of this graph, but we can see that there's a real difference in this survival strategy, how much hand heat was lost, versus this survival strategy. We see that a lot more heat was lost by this hand. After analyzing our data, we should form a conclusion. Now, when we write a conclusion, we want to restate the purpose of our experiment. Again, we were trying to determine what the best survival strategy would be if we were submerged in cold water and did not have the ability to get out on our own. We're going to restate our hypothesis, which was if we move around in the cold water, then we will stay warmer because our body is generating heat due to the friction in our muscles. Our third step will be to identify if the hypothesis was supported by the data or if it was incorrect. Science doesn't prove ideas to be correct. Science can gather information that supports ideas, or it can give us information which causes us to reject an idea. We can also sometimes get data which is inconclusive, which lets us know we need to conduct further experiments. We want to, in a conclusion, discuss the importance of our data by specifically citing examples of what the numbers are and what those numbers mean. We also want to mention problems in the experiment. Are there design flaws? Were there uncontrolled variables? For example, the experiment that I have my student do does have a design flaw. This is on purpose to initiate a discussion in our classes of what are things that we can do to take an experiment which is okay and make it better by trying to remove some of those flaws in the design. Finally, we want to make a concluding statement. What did we learn from the experiment, and what further directions might we take our research in this area? What extensions might we do in the future for new experiments that relate to the first one that we performed in class? All right, everybody, thanks for watching. Please know that when I put this video together, this is not an all-inclusive discussion of cold water safety survival strategies. For that, please visit this link. It includes some really valuable information so that if you do have a hobby which could potentially place you in risk, you should definitely familiarize yourself with the things that you should do and the things that you should not do if you ever do fall into cold water. I hope this video was helpful, and you can always find more of my videos by visiting me on either Twitter or my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, everybody.